Very much. We are going to get to Capitol Hill now, where John Thune is speaking. Let's listen.
Talk about it in a State of the Union address, and this legislation has a number of important provisions. It reduces and cuts red tape, increases housing supply, makes some important reforms, like the President suggested the other night, which is to place restrictions on the ownership, institutional investor ownership of single-family houses. And so it's a great job by Chairman Scott and his team. This is a bicameral, bipartisan bill that includes a number of important Senate priorities. A number of our senators have had input into this bill, and it's a piece of legislation that strikes at the very heart of the issue of affordability. Particularly with the younger Americans who are very concerned about their ability to experience the American dream and own a home. This legislation will make that more possible. On another issue, we are now 18 days into a second Democrat shutdown, and unfortunately, its Department of Homeland Security couldn't be worse timing. This is an agency that has obviously huge responsibilities and funds a number of important functions in our government, including our TSA agents who make it safe to fly. And so I'm hopeful that the Democrats will come to the conclusion that this is a really bad idea, particularly right now. As you all know, we live in a dangerous world, and that's abundantly clear. And there are 120,000 DHS employees who don't know right now whether or not they're going to get paid here in the very near future. And so I would hope that the Democrats will work with us. There's been a tremendous amount of outreach on behalf of the administration. The White House has worked to try and come up with provisions in this legislation that would help attract Democrat support. The Democrats at some point have to take yes for an answer. And so I just think it's really important, and 18 days into this now, second Democrat government shutdown, that because it is the Department of Homeland Security, which is responsible for defending and protecting the homeland, that the Democrats work with the White House and try and negotiate a deal that would allow that agency to be reopened again, for all the reasons I just mentioned. I'm going to hand it off now to Chairman Scott. As I said, he did a great job negotiating the Road to Housing bill, and I'll give him an opportunity to speak to that, and then we'll take questions. Chairman.
Thank you. The promises made, promises kept. President Trump made a very important campaign promise on the campaign trail, and we are delivering. Both the House and the Senate passing historic housing legislation. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act really does meet the need. It focuses on local jurisdictions, number one. It removes red tape and unnecessary burdensome processes from the federal government, number two. And number three, it creates and will expand housing supply while focusing on affordability. It's so important. As a kid who grew up in poverty, my mother became a first-time home buyer at the age of 38. Today in America, that age is 40. How do we bring those prices down? How do we make it easier for your average person to experience their version of the American dream through home ownership? I think it starts by making sure that Washington understands solutions start at home. And so what you'll find in this legislation is we start in local jurisdictions. We start by making sure that both the House, the Senate, Republicans and Democrats do not see this issue as red versus blue, House versus Senate. We see this as taking care of Americans who desperately want to experience the American dream. We made that possible through legislation that passed the House 399 to 1, passed through the Senate unanimously. Now we find ourselves taking 20 to 21 provisions out of the House bill, out of 25, and 36 out of our 40, creating in harmony legislation that moves housing forward for the average American, and it's really good news.
Would you think that Congress would need to authorize any military action against Iran beyond the 60-day or 90-day window?
No. I think the President has the authority that he needs to conduct the activities, the operations that are currently underway there. As you know, there's a lot of controversy around questions around the War Powers Act, but I think the President is acting in the best interest of the nation and our national security interests. by ensuring that he's protecting Americans and American bases and installations in that region, as well as those of our allies.
The president has not ruled out boots on the ground. He has said that this could go on for a long period of time. 6 American service members have already been killed. Where is Congress? When does Congress weigh in?
Well, Congress obviously, as you know, has the power of the purse. The president has broad authorities under Article 2 of the Constitution when it comes to defending America's national security interest. And the authority that he is using is very similar to that used by President Obama in Libya, going back prior to that, previous administrations. So, obviously, I don't think the president probably is going to take options off the table. You don't want to telegraph to your enemies what you will or will not do. But I think that they are achieving great success with what they've done so far. And it's targeted, of course, at naval and air assets in that region that the Iranians currently possess, ballistic missiles that could do great damage to Americans and to our allies in the region. And so I think once that has been achieved, once those objectives have been achieved, there are a lot of questions about what happens next. And I think, frankly, that's going to be largely up to the Iranian people. But this will eliminate the threat that is posed that could kill countless numbers of Americans. There is no country in the world that has more American blood on its hands than Iran. So I think the president was perfectly within his rights to take the steps that he took. I think it was a necessary step in order to protect American lives.
There are concerns about munitions piles, sir. There have been those concerns for some time. Are you worried that this is a military readiness issue? Because briefers told Congress that there are a high number of expenditures when it comes to munitions that are happening right now, so they'll run.
Right, and I think that one of the things that we did last summer, and one of the reasons we thought it was important to provide additional resources to the Defense Department was because for many years during the Biden administrations, defense spending wasn't even keeping up with the rate of inflation. And so we forward funded some things, but obviously we'll be paying attention, and General Kane, we're going to hear from him later today, and that question about munitions I'm sure will be asked. But as I said earlier, I think it's important to remember too that not only do we have, I think the resources necessary to conduct the operations that are underway right now, but also a lot of our allies in the region also have capabilities that are coming to bear now. And I think the Iranians, by sort of lashing out in every direction, have really sort of united a lot of our Arab allies in the region, and I think you're going to see more of that. The Europeans are starting to engage a little bit. I think people realize and recognize the threat that Iran represents, not just to that region, but to the entire world, and particularly if they continue to develop a nuclear capability. So it starts there: ballistic missiles, naval assets, an important shipping lane. There are lots of objectives that I think are going to be met, and hopefully will be met in a time frame that doesn't require some of the things that you are suggesting or asking questions about.
The demonstration is unconstitutional that Congress was not briefed beforehand. Why, in your opinion, was that okay that they went ahead without informing you beforehand? And do you buy the argument that Trump is now using that it was a preemptive strike?
Well, I think it was clearly a preemptive strike, and I think there was an imminent threat there. It's been conveyed, I think as most of you know, at least to the degree that they can share it, through the intelligence community that American assets in the region were going to be struck by Iranian missiles. And so I think it was, they responded accordingly there. The first part of your question was?
That Congress wasn't briefed beforehand.
Right, yeah. Well, and
saying this is unconstitutional.
I mean, the idea that the administration in any operation is going to tell 535 members of Congress who never leak about anything what exactly they're going to do. But they did inform us. They met with us last week. The Gang of Eight heard what was being contemplated. I was called, notified the day that the actual operations got underway. And we had a meeting again yesterday where they updated on progress so far. And we're going to have another meeting this afternoon at 3:30 with the entire Senate, both Democrats and Republicans. Well, they're going to lay out and answer questions about the ongoing operations. So I think that there have been, I think the administration, frankly, has very much kept us in the loop, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not just saying that's not just me. That's Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate.
Why not authorize this?
They've also been told that the U.S. government cannot help them to evacuate. Did the State Department, did the Trump administration kind of bungle the response in terms of telling Americans whether or not to evacuate? Did it now it's too late?
I think that you will see a ramped up, intensified effort to ensure that Americans are being evacuated from the region, and I suspect that's going to involve a good amount of investment and air assets to get people out of there. But, you know, obviously there are implications. This has turned out, as we kind of suspected it might be, that the Iranians, when they retaliated, it would be a very far-reaching response. But the fact that the Ayatollah is out of there, and a good amount of his leadership team, makes this world and our country safer. And I don't think there's any question about that. And I think getting rid of the capability that the Iranians have, both in terms of short-term and medium-term, or medium range, I should say, short range and medium range, ballistic missiles, making sure that they can never threaten the world with a nuclear weapon. These are really, really worthwhile objectives and things that I think have been a part of our national security, obviously, objectives and strategy for a long time. This was an opportunity to act on it. And had we not acted on it, I think the loss of life would be a lot greater. But we mourn any loss of life, and the families of those whose lives have been lost, we are, all of us, I think, incredibly mournful with them, and we'll continue to pray for them and their families.
All right, John, so a busy afternoon on Capitol Hill there, where Senate leadership obviously clung on Democrats to come around on the DHS funding at a time where we're engaged in serious conflict, and Senator Thune really backing the president's decision to do this.
It really is stunningly incongruous that we have these big military operations going on in a nation that has shouted debt to America for 47 years, has got fatwas against a number of our top leadership, from President Trump to Mike Pompeo, former leadership at least, to Robert O'Brien and John Bolton and others, and yet DHS goes unfunded. And how many Iranians was DHS looking into, and how many others may have come across the border as gotaways over the 4 years of the Biden administration when the border was literally wide open, and yet they won't fund DHS? Just doesn't seem to make any sense to anybody.
And clearly, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also thought it was interesting that Senator Thune was asked about whether or not the president needed authorization from Congress to carry out this mission. And he said, absolutely, he does not. He has all the authority that he needs already.
Yeah, and Democrats do not seem to be coming around, even with Republicans using this as a moment of urgency for that funding, John.
You know, it used to be a time, not too long ago, when America would launch military action in a nation and every member of Congress, say one or two, would be behind the president. Those days are long gone. But let's bring in our chief congressional correspondent, Chad Bergman, for more on what's going on the Hill. Chad.
John, good afternoon. In just about an hour or so here, the Senate, the entire Senate, is going to get a briefing here on what happened in Iran and what's going to happen in Iran. The House of Representatives later on, and we're probably going to have a push by Democrats in the next 24 hours to have a floor vote in the Senate on war powers. This would cut off the war in Iran. They would say, look, you can't do it under the War Powers Resolution. Wow. Now, President Trump, he did, under the War Powers Resolution, notify Congress. No administration, Democratic or Republican, has ever said that we think that the War Powers Resolution is constitutional, but he's complying with it in that sense. And then you have 60 to 90 days. Democrats say the president needed to consult the Congress after the military buildup. And even if Congress votes to end the war, now the president, he could still veto it. And as I always say, it's about the math. That would lack the votes. But you'd have to get that through the Senate, and you'd also have to get that through the House. And they just don't have the votes to override a veto. The one thing I will say, if they really wanted to cut off this operation post-haste, and we don't think that's ever really happened under the War Powers Resolution, is through the power of the purse. This is where Congress has its most powerful, prerogative here. We've had Congress cut off military operations before. I think about what happened after Black Hawk Down in Somalia in 1993, and that's because there was no declaration of war, there was no authorization. They were operating under these 60 to 90-day windows informing the Congress. Now, that's a good thing, probably, that they got the Pentagon funded. Just a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that the Department of Homeland Security is unfunded right now. Had they not gotten the Pentagon funded, that would be a battle royale right now. And I should also note something else that came up this afternoon. Roger Wicker, he is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Republican from Mississippi, and he was pressed by Fox as to whether or not he thought that we might need eventually a supplemental spending bill for Iran, and he did not rule that out. In other words, you have the regular spending bills come through, and if this goes on for a while, then you have to do another one. John, Sandra?
I'll tell you, Chad, there's no shortage of people who are experts in the world of military who say that pulling funding from this operation now would be about the worst thing it could possibly do, because it would leave Iran in a position where it could, 5 years from now, be back exactly where we are today.
And John, that's something that members are always very concerned about here, about undercutting the money when you have troops in theater.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot of people with their lives on the line, and we wish them well in their endeavors, and we're praying for them. Chad, thanks for the update. Appreciate it. Sandra?
John Yoo is still standing by. He will join us next on the Clinton deposition footage that has now been made public.
These eyes.
These eyes?